Hello YouTube, this is an April 2019 Yu-Gi-Oh! Gravekeeper's deck profile. This is the first of probably two builds that I'm going to be working with. This is the more budget version, so no hand traps, no Card of Demise, certainly no Pot of Extravagance, but still a very strong anti-meta deck here, Gravekeepers. Because the engine is pretty small. I mean, you pretty much just need Necro Valley, whatever cards that you can search Necro Valley with, some monsters, just a couple monsters. I mean, maybe a Descendant out there to destroy your opponent's monsters, and then probably Recruiter to search. I mean, and then just a few spells and traps to prepare your line of defense. But besides that, you can pretty much run whatever you want. So there's a lot of room for variety and different ways that you can play, interesting text that you can include. So I do like Gravekeepers a lot. Just before I begin, I'm just going to say that this deck costs, with the lowest rarities, probably around $90. So that is certainly the budget variety. But if you added hand traps, it would be more expensive. But here it is. Hope you enjoy the video. Thanks for watching. We have 3 Commandant right off the bat. So Commandant is a really good card because you can search Necro Valley with it. And Necro Valley is, of course, very crucial to the deck. I mean, it's the anti-meta card. I mean, it totally shuts down the graveyard. And Commandant is also a very strong beater with Necro Valley on the field. It's 2100 attack. So with that 500 boost, with that Necro Valley provides, you can really get some strong attack monsters on the field and also defense with Gravekeeper's Spy. So really solid card, Commandant, because you need that Necro Valley. So next we have triple Recruiter. Recruiter is decent. I ran it at 3 here. I wasn't thinking that it was the most important card because sometimes you don't want to be waiting until it's sent to the graveyard. You can't really use its effect if it's used as XYZ material. So I don't run any rank 3s because it's kind of a waste of the Recruiter effect. So sometimes I find myself normal summoning Recruiter and then just hoping my opponent will get rid of it somehow so I can search off of it. But if you use it as fusion material, then you do get its effects. So this card plus Spiritualist is pretty solid. So I do have Recruiter at 3, but that is an optional choice. I think you can probably cut that down to 2. So next I have 2 Spies. Spy is pretty solid because of its defense. I mean, with Necro Valley, it's a 2500 defense monster. The flip effect is, of course, slow, but I mean, sometimes you want to be special summoning Descendant from your deck, and then you can tribute Spy with Descendant's effect, and then pop 1 card your opponent controls. So that's a decent combo. Of course, it is slow, like I said, but I still would say that it does find its spot in the deck. I know some Gravekeeper's decks completely cut out Spy altogether, but I'm still running it. So next, double Spiritualist. Spiritualist is the pretty much polymerization. You can use monsters in your hand or on the field as material for a Spellcaster fusion monster if you control Necro Valley. So it's how you get Supernaturalist on the field. Decent attack too with Necro Valley. All these monsters ultimately will have a decent attack. So with the boost. So just a solid beatdown strategy with your traps, with the graveyard interruption, and with everything that this deck can do. I mean, all these monsters are pretty safe on the field because you do have ways to defend them. I'm running 1 Descendant because it does get cloggy at more than 1. I think 2 is okay. But you tribute a face-up Gravekeeper's monster you control to pop 1 card your opponent controls. Really solid effect. I mean, especially if you're tributing Recruiter, because you can get that Recruiter effect. But like I said, if you have more than 1 Descendant, it totally bricks because you can't really get a further play on the field with double in your hand. And you're pretty much bricking if you draw into too many Descendants. So I only have 1 here. And I only also have 1 Headman. Because not all the time will you have monsters in the graveyard to special summon from your graveyard, and it's also got a pretty low ATK, so only 1 Headman. I think this ratio is pretty solid. Maybe cut down Spy to 1. What else could you do? Spiritualist, I would say, is solid at 2. But if you want to run, if you really like Supernaturalist, you could bump Spiritualist up to 3. So then the spells, the very obvious choice, we have triple Necro Valley. Shuts down the graveyard. Cards in the graveyard can't move. to any other place. Cards can't be banished from the graveyard. These are old erratas here, but also attributes and types cannot be changed from the graveyard. And also the first effect, which is very important in this deck, that all Gravekeeper's monsters gain 500 ATK and DEF. This is the anti-meta card right here. I mean, this deck can be run in this card can be run in a lot of decks. I mean, I was actually thinking about running Necro Valley in pendulums because pendulums don't use the graveyard. But Necro Valley it is absolutely the staple of the deck. I mean, of course, the Gravekeepers will gain 500 ATK and DF, which is kind of the core point of running Gravekeepers, or Necro Valley in the Gravekeepers, but just all those effects that shut down the graveyard and affect the graveyard are seriously detrimental to the opponent, while it doesn't affect you because a lot of these, well, I don't run Rite of Spirit, but Rite of Spirit, for example, isn't affected by Necro Valley, so a lot of times your opponent will be affected by Necro Valley, but you won't be, so definitely a solid choice here. So next I have triple Necro Valley Throne. This card is like really, really good because it's a Rhoda as well as a double summon built into one. It's actually, if Gravekeepers were stronger, I could definitely see this card being banned. But luckily for people who do like Gravekeepers, it's not banned because Gravekeepers really, really needed that support. That extra normal summon is absolutely what you need to make your play sometimes. And the search, I mean, having 3 Rhodas in one deck is just pretty busted. So absolutely critical card right here, and definitely a cheap card, Necro Valley Throne, one of the newer ones, so definitely want to have 3. So we have 3 Pot of Duality. A pretty obvious choice, I would say, because you're not special summoning nearly enough where Pot of Duality is detrimental to the flow of the deck. And most of the deck is spells and traps, so you want to be digging through and getting whatever spell or trap you need. So next we have triple Allure of Darkness. This card is solid. Sometimes when you draw it by itself, it's dead because it's the only card in your hand you need to banish one dark monster from your hand. But a lot of times you're pretty much trading in 2 cards for 2 cards, and it just cycles through the deck and thins the deck. Pretty necessary, I would say, because you definitely want to be seeing more of your deck. So I do include it. Not totally budget friendly, this card, and you could take it out for other draw spells, I would say, but it does fit into the deck quite nicely because all the deck is dark. So we have 1 Desires. Only 1 because this deck doesn't finish your opponent very quickly. I mean, you can't just like OTK them, so you don't want to have too few cards in your deck where you can't draw anymore. So only 1 Desires. 1 Upstart as well, so 39 card deck. Definitely a solid choice right there. 1 Gravekeeper's Steel, because it recycles your graveyard, and sometimes, I mean, you're attributing your Recruiter to search with that Recruiter from Descendant with Descendant's effect, and then you can get one of those cards for it actually targets 2 Gravekeeper's monsters, I should say. You can't just add 1 from, it's not up to 2, but I mean, using whatever effects you're doing, maybe you send them to the grave with Spiritualist, or like I said with Descendant, you can get them right back with Steel. So one Steel, just like I have 1 Headman, 1 Steel I think is solid. And then also 1 Royal Tribute, which is a very devastating card. If you open it, you can normal summon your 1, or if you have Necro Valley Throne, you can normal summon twice, get all your monsters out of your hand, and then both players will discard all the monster cards they have in their hand to the graveyard if you have Necro Valley on the field. So if you go first, you can seriously strategically run over your opponent and just devastate their hand. So Royal Tribute it's totally hit or miss. I mean, you can actually really brick with that card, but I do have it because it just is so overwhelmingly good when it is good. So for the traps, 3 Imperial Tombs of Necro Valley. These are the secret variety, but I actually pulled a common one in an OTS pack a couple weeks ago. This card is like the Judgment, that it's like kind of Nova Alpha, actually very similar to Nova Alpha. It's a Tellarknight Nova Alpha. If you have a Gravekeeper's monster on the field as well as Necro Valley, It just doesn't draw you that one card like Nova Alpha does, but still a very solid card. I mean, I would definitely include this in the deck. I mean, this is the anti-meta card right here that is built in right into the archetype. So definitely want to include that, I would say. Maybe not at 3, but at least at 2, I would say. 1 Heavy Storm Duster for back row removal. I had this at 3 originally, but I just needed to make space, so I cut it down to 1. We got the Solemn Brigade, triple strike, and 1 judgment. No warning, because again, wanted to make space. I was trying to add in some more anti-meta kind of floodgates, so I took out warning as well as those heavy storm dusters. But these cards, as well as the Imperial Tombs and Necro Valley, this is what you're using to protect your monsters and protect your board and stop your opponent from playing. So you really need these cards to like control the board. And then finally, we have the floodgates that everybody can either love or hate. We have double rivalry and double anti-spell. You can set in the field zone, which is actually a mechanic that I'm not sure everybody knows about, because not how many times would you set a field spell unless you maybe already activated one and you want to get it out of your hand, but you can't act. Maybe it's a hard once per turn. But 2 anti-spell to stop your opponent from playing as quickly as they would. And it does affect you too, but you could side it out if you find it too detrimental to the speed of your deck. But I would say anti-spell is still, I mean, it's an anti-meta deck, so you want to have these floodgates. And rivalry is, I mean, obvious choice. I mean, you have all spellcasters, so rivalry, want to include it. Definitely would include it. So for the extra deck, we start off with the Fusion Monster, 2 Supernaturalist. This card gains ATK equal to the combined original levels of the materials used for its fusion summon. So if you have Spiritualist as well as Descendant, it'll gain 800 ATK plus Necro Valley will boost it up to 3,300. It protects your Necro Valley while it's on the field and Necro Valley's on the field, and also this card also is protected by card effects. And during the end phase, you can activate the effect during the main phase, but during the end phase, after you activate the effect during the main phase, you can add a Gravekeeper's card or a Necro Valley card. So Necro Valley Throne, for example, not just Necro Valley itself, but Throne would also work. Imperial Tombs would also work. Hidden Temples would work too if you ran that card. Supernaturalist is a really solid card, really the support, the boss monster that the deck needed, so I'm really happy that it came out, as well as Necro Valley Throne. That card, Necro Valley Throne, absolutely saved the deck, I would say. For the Link monsters, we start off with a Wee Witch's Apprentice, which is the pretty obvious choice. I mean, all the monsters are dark. You have a Lore of Darkness, so Wee Witches too. I mean, it doesn't use its graveyard effect because you do have Necro Valley on the field, but still gives everything a boost. So this plus Necro Valley, 1,000-point boost, pretty solid. We have a land just for those times when you have XYZ monsters in the extra zone and you need to clear up the zone. You can't use Wee Witch's Apprentice because they're not dark. An Underclock Taker, because Headman is only 500 ATK, so sometimes you need the boost. And we also have a Summon Sorceress. Not too many times will you be going into this, but all the monsters are the same type, so you can go into it and get another special summon from your deck. I mean, that is sometimes a play, but it requires 3 materials, so not too many times do I find myself going into Summon Sorceress, but I do include it. So a lot of just staple rank 4s coming up. Double Castel, so just your spot removal gets rid of a face-up card on the field, shuffles it into the deck. I mean, most of the time you're going to be using its second effect, not turning something face-down in defense position. But seriously solid card, Castel. I would pretty much say that it's the best rank 4. But Abyss Dweller definitely competes with it because in the deck that shuts down the graveyard, you really want to be including Abyss Dweller. So these 2 cards right here are just the bee's knees. I mean, you really, if you're running rank 4s, you want to be running those 2. So keep going. We have Dark Rebellion XYZ Dragon. Sometimes I find myself going into this because you do like it can get some pretty high ATK. So you can go in for a pretty devastating turn and get a lot of damage in. May not finish your opponent because you have to target one monster they control. So if they do have a monster, you're not going in for a direct attack. But still, I include it because it's a cheaper card and it's a very good card. Giant Hand. Just a quick effect that negates a monster effect. Just a solid way to to be able to do something on your opponent's turn. Not just the traps, you have a monster effect. It's quick too, so that's pretty cool that you can actually interrupt your opponent's play. Gaga Cowboy for burn damage. Like I said, these are all just staple rank 4s, so could be fairly obvious. We have a Karen Gorgon. This card is decent. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's not probably the most staple rank 4, but it is I would say good enough where I did include it because it can protect from being targeted. You just switch that target to another card that is an appropriate target for that effect. So if your opponent has targeting effects, then it can be good. We have a Satellarknight Deltros, which destroys 1 card on your opponent's side of the field, and you can do that 3 times because it requires 3 overlay materials, so you detach 3 times, once per turn. Doesn't use its Tellarknight effect, of course, but I mean, still a staple. I mean, I include it if you do want to just, probably you're not going to have a link monster pointing to this card. Probably this is going to be in the extra zone because you need that many, so many materials to make it. I mean, how many times are you going to have 6 monsters collectively where you go 3 into Summon Sorceress and 3 into Deltaros? That's probably not happening. So I find myself putting Deltaros in the extra zone for this deck. And then also a Diamond Dire Wolf, because that's just your last spot removal. Gets rid of face down cards, not just Castell, which is face up cards. But that's the deck. I hope you enjoy it. Hope you enjoyed it, because Gravekeeper is like really, really fun and seriously classic. Probably, I think, the first archetype of Yu-Gi-Oh! So definitely cool that they release support for it in Soul Fusion. So happy to display it in this video. Like I said, or maybe I maybe have said, this deck is around 100, probably a little bit less than 100. But thanks for watching. Have a good one.